Did you know that the Yeti is actually a character in One Piece, and that the Kilo Admiral is not really a Kilo Admiral? I'm gonna be telling you about every single Blox boss in One Piece. Starting off, we got the very first boss in the game, and this is the Gorilla King. A lot of you might think that there's actually no gorilla in One Piece, but there's actually a character that had a really short amount of screen time, and he's the gorilla. That's literally his name. He's literally just called Captain Gorilla, and he's actually a marine officer. He shows up in episode 514 of the show, and this is what he looks like. I can't lie, even I forgot about this guy before I started doing research for this video. Anyways, moving on to the second boss of the game, and that is Bobby the Clown. And I'm pretty sure most of you guys watching should already know which boss this is. This is obviously Buggy, and this guy is one of the most iconic One Piece characters. And this is what he looks like if you don't know. He actually has a lot of different versions. The first version is before the time skip, and this is after the time skip. Anyways, he's pretty much exactly the same in game as he is in the show, and he has the chop fruit in game as well. Pretty much a perfect copy. The only difference is the name, Bobby and Buggy. Anyways, moving on, the next boss that we got here is the Saw. This is a boss that spawns in Middletown. When the devs created Blox, they literally just took the second half of his name. His full name is Arlong the Saw, and he was a main villain in the Arlong Park arc. He first shows up in episode 31, so that's extremely early on. Anyways, moving on, the next boss that we got here is the Yeti. And a lot of you might be thinking, there is never ever Yeti in One Piece. Well, you're kind of right. There never was a single Yeti, but there was a point in the show where they showed you two different Yetis, and these are the Yeti Cool Brothers. The first one is named Rock, and the second one is named Scott. And these guys showed up in episode 591 during the Punk Hazard arc, and this is what they look like. They don't look exactly the same as they do in Blox. They're a little bit taller, and they're actually a race of giants according to the show. We might see them later, but who knows. Anyways, moving on, the next person that we got here is the Mob Leader, and I can't lie, it was really difficult to find a replica for this person because I don't think there's actually a perfect one, but the closest one I could get to is Chapon Veggie, and most of you should know who this guy is. He first showed up in episode 392, and he's one of the members of the Worst Generation, and he also helped Luffy during the Whole Cake Island arc. Anyways, moving on, the next boss here is the Vice Admiral, found at Marine Fortress, and this boss also does not have a perfect replica, but the closest one you can get to is Momonga, who's also a Vice Admiral, and he first showed up in the show in episode 302. Anyways, the next boss that we got here is the Saber Expert, and I'm pretty sure 99% of you watching should already know who this boss is in One Piece. It's obviously Shanks, one of the most iconic characters of all time, and the first time you see Shanks in the show is episode 4. All of you watching should already know who this guy is, and even if you don't, like, how can you miss this guy? He's literally super popular, even though he gets like no screen time. Anyways, moving on to the prison, the first boss that we got here is the Warden, and this is obviously Magdalene, and the cool thing about this boss is that he was also a warden in the show, and he almost ended up killing Luffy, but luckily he got away. Next up, we got the Chief Warden, who's actually the Vice Warden in the show, and his name is Hannibal. We didn't really see much of this guy, but we did see him at the Impel Down prison. Anyways, moving on, we got the Swan Boss, and I'm pretty sure most of you watching should already know who this is, and if you don't, it's Don Quixote do Flamingo. This guy first showed up in episode 151, but he wasn't really a main villain until way later on. The next time they showed him was literally after the time skip. Anyways, moving on, we got here is the Magma Admiral, and most of you should know this guy, and most of you also shouldn't like him either. It's Sakazuki, who's actually now the Fleet Admiral. I don't want to spoil too much, but he is a very hated character in the One Piece community. The next boss we got here is the Fishman Lord. This one is actually Hody Jones, who's honestly a pretty irrelevant villain because he was literally in the first arc after the time skip, and Luffy just destroyed the crap out of him. Even though he technically cheated for his powers, he still lost. Anyways, moving on to Upper Sky, the first boss that we got here is Whisper, and this is actually the only boss in Blox that has the exact same name as its One Piece character, Whisper. This is actually a Shanda warrior who we first saw in the Skypiea arc, and the first time we saw this guy was episode 153. Anyways, moving on, the next boss we got here is the Thunder God, and all of you should know who this guy is. It's literally Enno. He was also shown during the Skypiea arc, and we literally have not seen him since. Moving on to the Fountain City, the final island of the first sea, we got the Cyborg boss, and this guy's literally on Luffy's crew, and I'm pretty sure most of you watching should already know who this is. It's Frankie. Honestly, they remodeled his character really well. He literally looks almost exactly the same. They even added his sunglasses. Moving on to the next boss, we got the Ice Admiral, who's actually the boss you have to defeat to get into the second sea. And this is obviously Kuzan, and they've honestly recreated him really perfectly. He has the same fruit in the anime, and he has the same fruit in Blox Foods. He also looks exactly the same. The only thing they kind of messed up is his hair. Moving on to the second sea, the very first boss we got here is the Diamond Boss, and the person they recreated here is Diamante, who's actually one of the officers of the Don Quixote pirates, and this guy first showed himself in episode 629, and we haven't really seen him since. He's kind of an irrelevant character. Moving on to the next boss, we got Jeremy, and this is actually Bellamy. I honestly hated this guy at the start, but once we saw him after the time skip, he honestly changed a lot, so he's a much better character. Moving on to the next boss, we got Vegeta, and this is obviously Fujitora, the person that uses the gravity fruit. Moving on, the next boss that we got here is the Smoke Admiral, and the One Piece version of this character is obviously Smoker. The only mistake here is that Smoker isn't actually an admiral. Right now in the show he's a vice admiral, but he starts off as captain. But pretty much everything else looks exactly the same. And he even uses the same sword in the game. Moving on to the cursed ship, the boss here is the cursed captain. And I couldn't really find a comparison for One Piece, and this is honestly the closest guy I could come up with. And his name is Captain John. The next boss we got here is the Tidekeeper. And I couldn't really find an accurate comparison for this one because I'm pretty sure that Bloxwood's devs just made him up. But the closest thing I could find is Fukaboshi, and this is actually one of the Prince of Fishman Island. Don't get him confused with the king though, that guy is a lot bigger. The final boss of the second sea is Rip Indra, which we see in the cinematic. But obviously, as you all know, Rip Indra is actually a real person. It's a Bloxwood's avatar and doesn't actually exist in One Piece. And there's no character that even looks remotely close to this guy. Anyways, moving on to the third sea, the first boss that we got here is Stone. And this guy uses the bomb fruit. And I couldn't really find any people that look exactly like him, but everyone knows that there's actually a bomb fruit user in One Piece, and that is this guy. His name is Gem, but most of you should know him by the name Mr. Fire because he used to work for Baroque Works during the Alabasta arc. Anyways, moving on to the second boss of the third sea, we got the Island Empress. And this is obviously meant to be Boa Hancock, who's also known as the Snake Princess. And we first see her in episode 409. Anyways, moving on, we got the Kilo Admiral. And a pretty cool fact about this is that the Kilo Admiral is not really the Kilo Admiral in One Piece. Honestly, she's a lot weaker than an Admiral should be. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you guys literally forgot about this character. It's Miss Valentine, who's also Baroque Works' agent. She first showed up in episode 65, and the reason you probably don't remember her is because she got destroyed in literally like 5 seconds. But at least they got her character done correctly. She does look pretty similar. Well, as similar as a robot's character can look anyway. Moving on to the next boss, we got Captain Elephant. And this is none other than Jack the Drought, who's a part of the Beast Pirates and one of Kaido's big 3. But as far as the replication goes, it's honestly done really well. And he even uses the same weapon, the twin hooks, which are literally the swords he's holding in this picture. The next boss we got here is the Beautiful Pirate, and this is none other than Cavendish. And these guys honestly look really similar. Their hair is the same, their outfit is the same, and even their sword is the same. That's a pretty good comparison. The next boss we got here is the Logma boss. And a lot of you might not actually know who this guy is because he wasn't on screen for a long time. This one is Ryuma, and the first time we saw him was actually at the Thriller Bark arc, and he actually ended up giving his sword to Zoro. That's honestly the main thing I remember about this guy. The next boss we got here is the Cake Queen boss, who's the final boss of the third sea, but we still got raid bosses to go after this, so make sure you stick around. The Cake Queen is most obvious ones on this list. It's obviously Big Mom, aka Charlotte Linlin. But something I did notice is that in the game, she actually doesn't use the same fruit as she does in the anime. But she does use the same sword, and that is the Buddy Sword. Moving on to the raid bosses, the first one that we got here is Greybeard. And this one is honestly a really easy comparison. He's literally just Whitebeard. He looks exactly the same, but they just renamed him to Greybeard to avoid copyright. And in One Piece, he uses a fruit called the Gura Gura no Mi, which in English is called the Quake Quake fruit. So it's a pretty accurate recreation. Next on the list, we got Darkbeard, who's obviously Blackbeard. He looks exactly the same, and he even uses the same fruit, and that is obviously the Dark Fruit. Moving on to the next boss I got here, it's the Order boss. This guy literally just looks like a budget version of Law. I honestly wish they would redo this boss and make him look a little bit better. He literally looks like he's from an 8-bit game. I mean, literally just look at Law. You can see a pretty major difference, but at least he uses the same fruit. Next up, we got the Soul Reaper boss, and I couldn't really find a character to match this guy. The only thing I could think of is the Grim Reaper that Zoro saw in Wano when he was literally on the verge of dying, but I don't know if that really counts. Moving on to the Cake Prince boss, this one is obviously meant to be Katakuri, who's one of the commanders of Big Mom. After that, we got the Do King boss, who's literally just the same person. And moving on, we got the Terror Shark, which is just meant to be a sea beast from One Piece. Moving on, we got the Leviathan boss, and this is actually meant to be the very first sea beast that we saw in the show, the one that literally bit off Shanks' arm. But the Leviathan looks like a way scarier version of it. That's pretty much it.